Hey folks, Eber here with Hardware Canucks, and this is the Aero 15X from Gigabyte, a very popular notebook among content creators and gamers who are looking to get the most out of a notebook in a thin and light form factor. Now, the Aero lineup of notebooks was introduced when NVIDIA rolled out the GTX 10 series Max-Q designs, and Gigabyte has continued to develop upon that foundation. Now, this is the updated version that comes with the RTX 2070 Max-Q GPU. So let's find out how it actually performs and how well can a thin and light notebook can properly cool an RTX GPU, because yeah, it's quite something. So let's get into that right after a message from our sponsor. The new Razer Blade still defines portability without compromising on performance. Featuring Intel's latest 8th-gen CPU, an NVIDIA MX 150 GPU, up to 16 GB of memory, and up to 13 hours of battery life, experience some of the most popular games wherever you are. Learn more about the Blade Stealth down below. Alright, so if you're familiar with previous Aero 15X notebooks, nothing really has changed here in terms of design with this new model. Gigabyte has still stuck with the same chassis that's built with a few aluminum components. There's also the same Gigabyte glowing logo on the front lid. It's nowhere closer to what you would get with the Razer Blade 15 notebook. The keyboard layout still remains the same with perky RGB lighting and a few handful of lighting effects. The trackpad has improved significantly this time because it now features Windows precision drivers, so you can take advantage of all the gesture controls baked into Windows 10. I'm glad that Gigabyte listened. Although I will be honest, coming from my Blade 15 base model featuring a glass touchpad, the responsiveness is definitely noticeable coming to the Aero 15X. It's just not as smooth as what you'd find on the Blade notebook. I just feel like I'm just spoiled by the Blade. Damn it. The one thing that I really wished if Gigabyte did was to reposition the nose cam to an actual proper location, because it's still where it is and it's super weird. I mean, the quality is also pretty terrible. Port selection remains the same as well, and honestly, I have nothing to complain about it, especially in 2019, since we're seeing notebook manufacturers eliminating the important ones. So on the right hand side, you get your Kensington lock, power in, two USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, a Thunderbolt Type-C connector, and a fast UHS card reader. Guys, this is a big deal because, you know, personally as a content creator, I shoot a lot of video, especially in 4K, and if I want to transfer footage when I'm in trade shows like CES, that card reader can come in super beneficial because A, it's fast, and it's also built into the notebook, so I don't have to carry external adapters or everything like that. Thank you, Gigabyte. I think this is probably one of the reasons why content creators would look into a Windows notebook, especially like the Aero 15X, because it's got everything. I mean, you can say no to that. Switching over to the left, we have an RJ45 port, another USB 3.1 Gen 2 port, HDMI 2.0, a USB-C port that carries a DisplayPort 1.4 signal, and a headphone/mic jack. Moving on to the display, and this, in my opinion, is a significant upgrade from the previous generation. It's a 1080p IPS screen with a refresh rate of 144 Hz. This panel is made by LG and it features the Pantone certification, and the colors look fabulous on the screen. I'd say it's a tad better and brighter than my Blade 15 base model. If you're a content creator, you'll absolutely love color correcting and color grading your footage on the Aero 15X because it's just so good. I don't think I have anything to complain about this display. And when you pair that up with the 144 Hz refresh rate, it's definitely something that you don't want to miss, especially in 2019, because gaming on it as well is a fantastic experience. I mean, once you go 144 Hz, it's really hard to go back to a 60 Hz screen, which is why I'm very hesitant to go back to my Blade 15 base model, because that notebook has a 60 Hz display. So 144 Hz, man. The curse is real. Specs-wise, this notebook features a Core i7-8750H 6-core 12-threaded processor. It's got 16 GB of memory clocked at 2666 MHz. There's also a 1TB Intel 760p NVMe SSD that rocks read speeds above 2.8 GB per second and writes around 1.4 GB per second, so pretty fast. And the star of the show is, of course, the RTX 2070 Max-Q. When you get inside this notebook, you can easily get access to the internal components. So for instance, the memory is easily accessible. You can actually max it out to 64 GB, which is kind of insane. And there's also an extra NVMe M.2 slot that you can populate. So you can have a dual storage configuration, which is quite nice. And there's also a 94 kilowatt hour battery that is pretty good, especially when it comes to light load test. I mean, you need to consider that this notebook features a 144 Hz refresh rate. So I was able to get just a little over 6 hours of use with my light load test, which consists of refreshing a Chrome web page for about 15 seconds. And under heavy load, it's definitely gonna reduce, especially when you're gaming on it. I wouldn't expect all day battery life with this notebook, but it's very respectable considering the specs that it features. All right, so I guess the last thing to discuss here is performance. But before I get into the numbers, I do want to talk about the specs on the RTX 2070 because it actually ranges on the type of cooling design that notebook manufacturers have in-housed inside a thin and light chassis. So it depends from brand to brand. And if you look at NVIDIA's website, it's actually funny enough because the specs on the RTX 2070 states that the boost clock speeds can range anywhere between 1100 megahertz to 1440 megahertz. And, it's funny enough, when you look at the RTX 2080, the delta in terms of frequency is 500 megahertz. And that's insane. So it's up to the notebook manufacturers to kind of find and tweak what the sweet spot is. So I really had to monitor clock speeds to make sure that I was getting what was actually listed on the NVIDIA's site. So let's talk about that. Kicking things off with some synthetic tests, the 6-core 12-thread CPU is a strong performer for rendering. If you're an architect or a designer or even a content creator, this thing will do an amazing job. I took this 13-minute 4K project, exported it to the YouTube 4K preset, and this notebook took 15 minutes and 17 seconds to render. Now, I do need to point out that if you're coming from a notebook featuring a GTX 1070 or a GTX 1080 Max-Q GPU, then there's absolutely no reason to upgrade to the RTX notebook because the difference in performance, especially for rendering, is really not that big. Gaming, on the other hand, was a fantastic experience, and pair that up with a 144 Hz refresh rate display, this thing flies. You can easily push over 100 frames per second in most AAA titles at the highest preset, except for Metro Exodus and Battlefield 1, since they are a bit demanding. Now, when you turn on RTX on Metro Exodus, it's definitely gonna take a dip in performance. Taking a look at temperatures on a full synthetic load using AIDA64, the CPU did get quite toasty around 89C, and the clock speeds were hovering around 2.8 gigahertz, which is pretty respectable. For casual tasks, the CPU was easily able to hit 4 gigahertz, so that's nice. The RTX 2070 did max out at 86C, and the clock speeds were shifting back and forth between 1300 and 1410 megahertz, which does align really well within NVIDIA's spec sheet. Fan noise is something to consider with the Aero 15X, as it's not a quiet machine, especially when you enable gaming mode within Gigabyte's own utility software. Speaking of gaming mode, there are actually 3 modes built inside this PC on the utility software. So there's quiet, normal, and gaming. I did all my testing with gaming mode enabled to get the best out of the system. But if you decide to use normal mode, it's going to take a slight dip in performance, not significant, because the clock speeds kind of vary between 1200 and 1300 megahertz versus 1300 and 1400 megahertz when you enable gaming mode. And when you enable quiet mode, it does tone down the fans just a little bit, but it also takes a little bit of a hit in terms of performance. Okay, so I guess this brings us to the conclusion, and I want to kick things off by clearing some misconceptions that have been floating around the internet. You see, a lot of people think that the new RTX notebooks are ridiculously expensive, and to an extent, I can agree because they're not cheap, but you need to understand that if you kind of go back a couple of years ago when NVIDIA rolled out GTX 10 series Max-Q designs, those notebooks were priced similarly to what the RTX notebooks are right now. I mean, a good example would be this exact same Aero 15X notebook that I looked at a while back featuring a GTX 1070 Max-Q GPU. That thing cost around $2,200. And when you compare to something like this, featuring an RTX 2070 GPU, it's $200 more expensive, but that's totally justifiable for the performance that you're getting in gaming. And I get it, if you are on a budget trying to save some money, you're actually much better off looking into a notebook featuring a GTX 10 series design. But if you really want the absolute best in terms of performance, RTX notebooks are here, and it's kind of amazing to see brands pack so much power in a notebook that's easily portable. I mean, you can take this with you, I mean, anywhere you go. If you're going for shows or doing coverage and stuff like that, it's there for you. The performance is there. I don't think you'll ever be disappointed whatsoever. So coming back to the Aero 15X, should you buy this notebook? Well, the answer really depends on what you're looking for in a notebook. If you want the absolute best performance in a relatively thin and light chassis, then this is the way to go. Except, mind you, this notebook in particular does run a little warm, and the fan noise is also quite loud. So if you're gaming on it, I'd highly recommend pairing, maybe throwing on some headphones to eliminate that. Also, the speakers on these are they're not really that great. It's not front facing, they're kind of bottom facing as well. So it really doesn't sound that great compared to something like the Razer Blade 15. The build quality is also not on par with that. And that's about it. That's the only complaint I have about the Aero 15X. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Let me know what you guys think about this notebook. I mean, considering that it costs around $2,400, sure, you can build a gaming PC, the argument's always there, but I'd love to know your thoughts about RTX on a notebook. What do you think about it? Is it something that you'll consider looking into? Also, I'm really looking forward to NVIDIA rolling out the GTX 1660 Ti into notebooks. I mean, that would be kind of awesome. I just can't wait for that to happen. So anyways, that's been it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some relevant content over here. Subscribe to our Boot Sequence channel. I'm signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next one.